Okay, hello one more time. To conclude my theme on World War I, this will be the last WIDIP having to do with World War I. Kind of revisit it with the Russia stuff. But here we go, our topic is historical importance of World War I. Okay, here we go. Onward and forward. So, what I want to start off by saying is that there's about, I'm going to have 8 things altogether, 8 points. Point number 1. This thing is the first time in history where we see industrialized nations really battle it out. Okay? Now, I kind of commented that there were different types of conflicts having to do with the Industrial Revolution. Remember the Zulus, okay? Non-industrialized people getting conquered by industrialized people. All right, so this is sort of the second one. Industrialized people fighting each other. All right? This is going to make, basically the way I'm going to work this is we're going to give a point and then there's going to be a result. Okay, so what is the result of this? Well, nations are not just in Europe now. Okay, some of these nations that are non-European are going to start talking to themselves and saying, okay, we need to industrialize. And I think the best example would be the Japanese. I think that's the best example. Okay, so that's number 1. People observe what happens in World War I and they say, look at the carnage. If we don't get ourselves industrialized, we're going to get wiped out, maybe ourselves. Okay, point number 2. We're talking about ranged warfare. We've talked about ranged warfare from slings and bows and arrows to catapults, okay, trebuchets, things like that. Okay, industry is going to increase that distance that battle can be fought. Weapons are much more accurate. The amount of time between battles is shortened because of transportation, one of the original 3 things that weapons, transportation, things for the home, the 3 things that the Industrial Revolution improves right away. Okay? So now, I'm sure you can figure this out, what the result is. The result is that during World War I, these are estimates now, 9 to 10 million military deaths. All right? You can see that the 20th century is pretty bloody, is a pretty darn bloody time. All right? Wait till I get to the World War II. We kind of know that. Number 3, my third point I would like to make. My third point is that, and I've also talked about this when I talked about the failures of colonialism. This is bad, and I have to say the English were the worst. They were the worst at this. They put their colonial troops in horrible, horrible situations, which you've heard me say already. Now, what does that mean? That means that South African troops and Australian troops and New Zealand troops and Indian troops who come to Europe to fight for the British, they're mad and they're irritated, and people back home are hurt and disappointed. And so now what do we see? We start to see independence movements on the rise. Independence movements that are desired by these people in these quote-unquote colonial areas. Okay? The United States has been around by this time for 140 years. So it's not as the same sort of thing anymore. But these European colonial places, they've about had it. All right? Okay, number 4. Moving right along here. My goodness. Number 4. All right, I just talked about this the other day. The peace treaty is a complete failure. And it's a complete failure because the British and the French, really frankly, I'd have to say they blow it. And they are only interested in revenge. Revenge upon the Germans. And so the Germans get hammered in the peace treaty. And so what's the result? Well, obviously the result of this is a second world war breaks out in just 20 years. Okay? And just 20 years later. And, the 9 to 10 number I gave you up top with number 2, that's just military deaths. We watched that video on the price of war and the price of World War II with all the the little images. We watched that YouTube video on that. I think they said basically, if I remember correctly, that's like 70 million. Okay, so there's my number I'm giving you this time. These things are nebulous and these things are difficult to often get an exact number, but those are what historians basically estimate. So it's interesting. Some people say that World War I and World War II were really just one single conflict. 20 years in between, in the grand scheme of history, is not that long, and that really it was just the World War is what we should just call that whole period from 1914 to 1945. All right. Number 5. The United States will revert to isolationism after. They were isolationists before, but they're not really, and they can't stay that way. And you know as well as I do that once World War II breaks out, the United States doesn't get involved for over 2 years. The Germans invade Poland in September 1939, and of course the United States doesn't get involved until December 7th, 1941. The United States sits out for 2 years. So this attempt to be isolationist is not going to work. And so each side is going to either worry about the United States getting in or worry about the United States not getting in. And they're both sides going forward in any conflict, not just World War II, are going to be worried about the United States. So and look, there are some people today who say the United States is way too involved in world events, and they point to this time period where we should have gone back and been isolationists and just stayed that way. And we never really do. We don't do that anymore. And we go back and forth. And of course, we went to Vietnam and Korea in the 20th century. We've gone to Afghanistan and Iraq in the 21st century. And so these are constant questions that are always dealt with. Okay. All right. Number 6. Here's one I bet you did not know. Okay. This one is. This one I think you're going to be really, really surprised about. So, number 6. Did you know that when the war ended, people came home, animals came home, some nations sent their supplies that they had shipped to Europe, they sent them back home, and all of this, along with the filth of war, okay, the bloody injuries, the sick and injured troops traveling home. Okay, the world today is much more safe because nations have borders, and one of the things that borders do is they try to stop the movement of disease. Okay, everybody forgets that in this hot political climate, but borders help to make sure that diseases don't spread. And this lesson was learned at this exact moment in history after World War I, when all these sick, injured, and there's not a lot of antibiotics in these days, okay? This is not where you just give them an antibiotic. These people have terrible wounds that are festering and all these, and they come back home and and this disease gets spread all over. This number is going to shock you. It's absolutely going to shock you. Did you know that there was an epidemic of influenza that ravaged and went worldwide? See, once disease is out there, once disease is going, it's hard to stop it. So you see this word influenza, you should see FLU right in the middle. So we say that get a flu shot. Well, that's basically what you're trying to avoid is influenza when you get a flu shot. Look at this number, okay? It killed between the years as the war ends, the estimate between 22 and 50 million people. I mean, that's mind-blowing. That's mind-boggling to think about that. All right? And why is it such a big spread, Mr. O'Brien? Well, there's lots of estimates. There's lots of different groups of people that say, well, this is what it really is. This is what it really is. So I'm just giving you. I mean, I guess I would argue that if it's 5 million, it's not as bad. I mean, this is bad, regardless of how you look at it. Okay? All right, 2 more. Number 7. Number 7 has to do with the Middle East, which seems like we talk about the Middle East all the time these days, don't we? The Middle East is the hotspot of the world today. Okay? Now, why? Well, the Middle East was really created, the map that we think of today was created after World War I. It was really the British that did it. And the British and the French did this because Turkey, or what we would call the Ottoman Turkish Empire, joined sides with the Central Powers. They joined sides with the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians. Okay, so when they're defeated, when the Turkish Empire is defeated, the British break up their empire and they create all kinds of different countries. Like Iraq is a perfect example. And these are mostly determined by the British and the French. The British and the French do a poor job, a very poor job to a degree, making these new countries sort of specific to particular tribal, what I'm going to call tribal, ethnic, and religious boundaries. Okay? In other words, they're laying a border of two different nations right through the middle of one particular tribe's territory. So you got one tribe that's over here in this one country, one half the tribe over here, and you got the other half the tribe over here. Okay, and these things. Okay, so these people, what they really want is their own country. Like we see this with the Kurds today, Kurds, the Kurds, the Kurds. This is exactly what's going on with them. The Kurds have trouble with Turkey. They have trouble with Syria. They had trouble all over the place. But they really want their own country. So what we see is many of the conflicts that we see throughout the rest of the 20th century and even into today have to do with these post-World War I divisions done by the British and the French. Okay? Okay, so here we go. Number 8, here's the last one. Okay? And the last one has to do with Russia. Okay? Russia. And look, here's what I would say. This is super important for the 20th century and frankly, again, to today. Russia is absolutely devastated by World War I. We're going to learn that they end up having a brutal civil war / revolution in Russia. I've talked to you about this before in political spectrum number 2. Anarchy reigns. Okay? There's going to be something called the Red Terror. That should remind you of the Reign of Terror. It was very similar. Okay? And so this devastation leaves a void at the top of the country. Okay? What is it going to get filled with? Well, it's going to get filled with the communists. And they're going to end up with a dictatorship, an oligarchy system in the Soviet Union, led by the communists, led by Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin and Leon Trotsky. And you're going to have this nation, the Soviet Union, that is going to be one of the biggest players in world history for the next 70 plus years. And, at next quarter, we'll get into this near the end of the course. We'll get into this Cold War thing again. And that whole story and how that's super important. Well, a lot of this has to do with World War I. See, World War I is kind of a forgotten conflict. Most Americans, we know about, the Middle Eastern wars, okay, Iraq and Afghanistan. We study a lot about Vietnam, and we study a lot about World War II. In America, we really forget about the Korean War, which was between World War II and Vietnam, and we really forget about World War I. And part of that is we weren't there very long. But if you really look at it, and I think this widow right here really tells a story that World War I has a huge influence, really still even on the world today. Okay? All right, so now what I will show you last is that you are also going to eventually write an essay on this particular topic, and some of this can help you. See the third one down? Why were there so many battlefield deaths during World War I? So when it's time to write that, you keep this WIDUP in mind. Okay, everybody? So there we go. That's it for the World War I theme. I hope you enjoyed today's WIDUP. And remember, even though I'm not here, I'm still here.